Welcome back to another video about relaxation. Today I wanted to do something slightly different, so I'm going to be doing a history mystery. So it's an unsolved murder, but the murder occurred in the 1400s in England, so it happened a very long time ago. And I went to the Tower of London a few years ago. I've been many times, but at this time I was actually old enough to, be interested in the history and understand it better. And I read this story and I was just amazed. So I thought I would share it with you today. So my usual disclaimers, though this is an old story, so it's not going to be too detailed. It happened like 600 years ago. It does mention murder. So if you will find that upsetting, please click off this video. If you find the combination of ASMR and true crime or history or anything, ASMR, anything upsetting or triggering, please click off this video and I'll just get started. So there's a lot of backstory to this. I got this from a website and there's years and years of backstory, but that's about other people and this is about the crime, so it might reference earlier stories, and I'm sorry if it doesn't all make sense, but I'm going to try and explain it as best as possible. So this is the story of the princes in the tower, and the princes were Edward V, King of England. Edward V, who was only 12 when he went missing, and his younger brother Richard, who was 9. So on the 9th of April 1483, Edward IV, King Edward IV of England, died unexpectedly, aged 41, possibly of pneumonia or typhoid. By that time, he had achieved relative peace and prosperity, leaving behind a secured crown and personal fortune. On his deathbed, the king entrusted his loyal brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as the lord and protector to his heir. So I think he had 3 daughters and then 2 sons, I think, but obviously his heir was his oldest son, and his oldest son's name was Edward V, and then he had a younger brother called Richard. So he'd obviously named the younger brother Richard after his own brother, so it is quite confusing. So there's the King Edward IV who's just died, his brother Richard of Gloucester, and then King Edward IV's children, Edward V and his brother who was 9, Richard. So there's 2 Edwards and 2 Richards in this story, though Edward IV has died. On his deathbed, I've read that Prince Edward was at Ludlow Castle when the news arrived of his father's death. At the age of 12, he was now the new king, and his brother Richard, aged 9, became heir presumptive. Immediately, Edward V made his way to London, escorted by his maternal uncle, Earl Rivers. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who was in the north of England, did not hear of his brother's death immediately. Elizabeth, who was Edward IV's wife and Edward V and Richard's mother, and her family had decided to wait to send the news as they wanted to be sure of their position within the new reign. When the news finally arrived a few days later, Richard rushed to meet his nephew on his return journey and escort him personally. On April 29th, Richard intercepted the royal entourage. After dining with them the following morning, the Duke, despite Edward's protests, so despite 12-year-old King Edward's protests, had Earl Rivers, so his uncle, and Elizabeth's son, Lord Richard Grey. So Elizabeth's son must, I imagine, if they're referring to it as just Elizabeth's son and not Edward's son too, maybe it was from a previous marriage and husband died, I'm not sure, so his older brother. It must be, or he'd be the heir, so it must be Elizabeth's son from a previous marriage. They were subsequently executed, so that's awful. So his uncle and his older brother were executed. On reaching London, Gloucester had Edward placed in the Tower of London for his protection. So he said it was for his protection, but we all know really why he did it. Edward's death had left his widow vulnerable. She was unpopular at court, and with Richard as protector, she had lost control over the king. Her fears grew as many members of her family and close supporters were executed. So obviously her brother and her oldest son have now been executed, and she is worried. So Elizabeth was taking no chances, and once again she gathered up her children and servants and headed for sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. She and her household arrived in April 1483, so they obviously don't know an exact date, but it must have been very soon after the executions. They brought so many possessions with them that their servants had to break down a section of the abbey walls to get everything inside. Which kind of shows what royalty was like back then. As long as Elizabeth Woodville and her children were together in sanctuary, they were relatively safe. Elizabeth also knew it was crucial to keep her son Richard, the heir presumptive, under her close guard. This all changed when when Richard of Gloucester ordered that the young prince join his brother at the Tower. So Richard of Gloucester insisted that the younger son, who would be the next in line for the throne, also join them at the Tower. Although she resisted at first, Elizabeth finally bid farewell to young Richard, never to see him again. I'll refer to him as young Richard from now on to stop any confusion. So, initially, putting Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, in the Tower did not raise suspicions. The two boys were very young and vulnerable. Their safety was paramount. The Tower was also a starting point for the coronation process, and it was traditional for a new monarch to stay there until the ceremony. So it didn't seem too suspicious at first. Edward's coronation was scheduled for the 22nd of June 1483, and preparations such as minting coins were underway. However, the following month, the celebrations planned for young Edward V became a coronation for his uncle and protector, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. So, in mid-June, Parliament declared the princes illegitimate on the grounds that their father, Edward IV, had contracted to marry Lady Eleanor Butler before he married Elizabeth Woodville. This would have made his marriage to Elizabeth invalid, so we've heard of things like that happening later on with the Tudors. With the prince's claim to the throne discredited, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, so I'll call him Richard Gloucester from now on, like it's his full name, became next in line, as his other brothers Edmund, Earl of Rutland, and George, Duke of Clarence, had both died before Edward IV. On the 6th of July, the prince's uncle was crowned King Richard III. So you may have heard that very famously from a Shakespeare play, and Shakespeare used to write plays about royalty way before his time, because if he wrote about anything modern, he would probably be executed. So it was okay for him to write about people back in the past, and he did write a play about Richard III. Having proclaimed himself king, Richard soon amassed enemies at court, and he grew more fearful of being usurped. The last reference to the young prince is in the Great Chronicle, which on the 16th of June. So I think, the young prince is so sorry, Richard is fearful of his crown, and now it's saying that the last reference to the young princes, both King Edward V and his younger brother Richard, was in the Great Chronicle on the 16th of June, records that the children of King Edward were seen shooting arrows and playing in the garden of the Tower Sundry. So they were seen on the 16th of June playing. A dark secret, according to the Italian chronicler Dominic So basically, if anyone had accused him, they would have been killed. So, around 30 years lapsed before the first account of the prince's disappearance was written. This was in an unfinished biography, The History of Richard III, written by Henry VIII's Chancellor, Sir Thomas More, between 1513 and 1518. Not only was More writing some time after the event, but he was writing to validate a Tudor version of history. In his account, Richard is portrayed as the villain, blamed for ordering the boys' murders to be carried out by two servants. Quote, the innocent children lying in their beds, Miles Forrest and John Dighton, about midnight came into the chamber and suddenly lapped them up among the clothes. So bewrapped them and entangled them, keeping them down by force to the feather bed and the pillows hard unto their mouths, that within a while smothered and stifled, they gave up to their God their innocent souls. So this entire conversation between the individuals are presented as verbatim, despite Moore being a child himself. So basically, this is probably imagined, though it could very easily be true. It's just they can't prove it. The prime suspect has long been Richard III. He had invalidated his nephew's claim to the throne and had himself become crowned king. His increasing paranoia as his enemies multiplied led him to having a close ally, Lord Hastings, arrested and executed at the Tower. So that shows the kind of state of mind he was in. While they lived, the young princes would have been an increasing threat to Richard, but there were others who wanted the princes out of the way too. The case was made even more intriguing when in 1491, so 8 years later, a man called Perkin Warbeck claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He said he had escaped from the Tower and spent the intervening years on the run. Over the next 6 years, Warbeck travelled across Europe, convincing a number of important people, including Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, and James IV of Scotland, that he was Richard IV of England. He also convinced Margaret of York, the aunt of the real prince. In 1497, Warbeck attempted to invade England. He failed and ended up in the Tower of London. He confessed to being an impostor and was later executed. So Richard does get his comeuppance, as his reign only lasted a couple of years. On August the 22nd, 1485, Richard was killed at the Battle of Bosworth. His opponent, Henry Tudor, was crowned Henry VII on the 30th of October, and in January 1486 married Elizabeth of York, the prince's eldest sister. So that's how they're all related. So this is where the Tudors come into it, but the little boys are actually related to the Tudors too, because their older sister married the Tudors. So this is when I became interested, so not even at the murders, this is the interesting bit to me. So nearly 200 years later, in 1674, Charles II ordered the demolition of what remained of the royal palace to the south of the White Tower. The location included a turret that had once contained a privy staircase leading to St. John's Chapel. Beneath the foundations of the staircase, some 3 meters or 10 feet below the ground, the workmen were astonished to find a wooden chest containing 2 skeletons. It was concluded that they were the bones of the children. Eyewitnesses described pieces of rag and velvet adhering to the bones. Only royals could wear velvet. The skeletons became something of a tourist attraction and remained on display for the next 4 years, until Charles II arranged for their reburial in Westminster Abbey. They lie there to this day, with a brief interruption in 1933 when they were forensically re-examined. It was concluded that they belonged to 2 boys, possibly aged about 10 and 12 years. Following the discovery of Richard III's remains in 2012, more sophisticated forensics tests were able to identify the bones as definitely those of the king himself. The showed evidence of a congenital condition causing missing teeth inherited from their paternal grandmother Cecily, Duchess of York. However, Dr. John Ashdown Hill, a member of the Looking for Richard project, pointed out that Richard's skull didn't have this genetic abnormality. This newly revealed dental evidence is another remarkable discovery from the results of the Looking for Richard project. Modern scientific analysis applied to the flawed 1933 investigation of the bones in the urn has revealed that the sex of the historical period of death remains unknown. So that's interesting. So basically the test in 1933 said that they were definitely the boys, but now people are disputing that. So that's really interesting. So will we ever know? Someone long dead themselves knew what happened to the little princes. Science may finally provide a way to identify the bones, but amid all the theorizing, we shouldn't forget that these were young children trapped and terrified. They became inconvenient pawns in a political game, and they were betrayed by adults they trusted. Who those adults were, we will probably never know. So that's a bit of a shorter one today, but I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was fascinating because to me, it probably is the